Moses is a woman, page 58. Seeing a girl seated in a rocking chair with her sewing in her lap, the men stopped in the doorway. The young man Laura had noticed outside her window, the one the sheriff had called Walt, was the first to recover. "Well, look who's here," he exclaimed, swaggering across the threshold. "It's young Miss Eastman herself, just as pretty as I heard she was." Laura's anger rose to the boiling point. She had no objection to being told she was pretty, but the young man's tone was so familiar that she felt insulted. Bert should put him out of the house. But Bert had disappeared. Without rising from her chair, she demanded angrily, "What right do you have to come into my room?" Even to her own ears, her accent was as pronounced as her Aunt Ruth's. "No Southern gentleman would have thought of doing such a thing." Walt did not move. "Well, aren't we high and mighty?" His eyes, bold and mocking, never left Laura. The sheriff stepped forward. "We have a warrant to search the house, Miss Eastman. These men," he motioned to the troop behind him, "are looking for a runaway slave." Laura clutched the sewing in her lap, stabbing her hand on the needle as she did so. The sudden pain made her more annoyed than ever. "Then please proceed," she said. She tried to look composed, though her hands were shaking. "My father won't be happy at the way your men are treating the furniture." "They aren't my men," the sheriff said unhappily. "They've come in from the south, mostly, and the law says I have to cooperate with them. You know I wouldn't come here on my own. Your father's an old friend of mine, and I don't want to lose his goodwill." He stepped outside and turned to the men in the hallway. "Come in and look around. Be quick about it." The men shuffled uneasily and murmured among themselves. Two of them took a few steps into the room and glanced about. Walt was the only one who failed to look embarrassed. He strolled to the wardrobe and took a leisurely survey of Laura's dresses, crisply ironed and scented with lavender. One of the other men said, "Come on, Walt, we don't need to worry about this room. This little Southern lady isn't going to harbor any slave in here." Walt stooped to inspect the floor of the wardrobe and rapped on the wall beside it, as if looking for a hidden room. Laura bent her head over her sewing to hide her anxious eyes. By the time they finally left, she felt limp. The group went across the hall to her parents' room, poked their heads into the sewing room, and then clattered down the stairs. The sheriff had come back to Laura to apologize again for the intrusion. "I hope you realize I'm just doing my duty. Tell your pa that, will you?" "Yes, I'll tell him." For a moment after the sheriff left, Laura sat without moving. Then she went into the hall where she could hear the men who were gathered downstairs in the entrance. "You think he got away?" one asked. "Well, I figure he wasn't here at all. Maybe Joel never brought him. Or if he did, that little spitfire upstairs wouldn't let him in." "Did you hear her? No Southern gentleman would think of doing such a thing." This remark was followed by laughter. Another voice said grimly, "I'm not so sure. Did you see those clothes hanging behind the stove? Bert said they were his, but I don't believe it. Not for a minute. I say let's keep an eye on the house." The sheriff cut in. "Let's go," he ordered. Laura moaned to herself. How foolish they had been to leave Martin's clothes in plain view. Bert should have known better, and so should she. Feet shuffled in the hall downstairs, and then the door closed. Bert came up the back way. He was grinning. "Nice job, sis." Laura looked up at him, bit her lip, and burst into tears. Bert said awkwardly, "Hey, don't cry now. It's all over." Laura rubbed her eyes on her sleeve. "But it was terrible. I was so scared." He looked surprised. "You didn't act scared. You just acted mad." He rolled back the rug. "Let's see how Martin feels." As he lifted the trap door, he announced to Martin, "They've gone." Martin was obviously shaken. He took a deep breath and raised himself to the edge of the opening. There, he slumped down and glanced around the room as if to assure himself that the men were indeed gone. "I feel like that man in the Bible, Lazarus," he said with a feeble smile. "It's like a tomb in there." Laura couldn't resist smiling. "Where did you hear about Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead?" "Well, my papa used to read the Bible to us every day. All the time he read that book." "Well, you'd better be thankful for this tomb," Bert told him. "If you'd stayed in the wardrobe in the spare room, you'd be on your way down south right now." Martin shuddered. "I wasn't easy about that wardrobe. I sure do thank you for taking me out of it. And you too, Miss Laura, for letting me stay here." Laura felt that she was receiving credit she didn't deserve. "Bert didn't give me any choice." "Well, you didn't tell on me," Martin pointed out. Again, she refused to accept his praise. "I had to think of my father. He'd be in bad trouble if he were found here." Bert looked at her sharply. "Well, whatever your reasons were, I'm glad you kept your mouth shut. We shouldn't have any more trouble now. Joel will come after Martin tonight, and that'll be the end of it." "Why didn't you hear them?" asked Laura. "They saw Martin's clothes in the kitchen, and they said they were going to watch the house." Bert groaned. "I knew I should have burned those clothes." "Well, those are the only clothes I have." Martin looked shocked. "You can keep mine," said Bert. "They're too small for me anyway." "But thank you." Martin smoothed the front of the blue wool shirt. "They're a lot warmer in mine. I need warm clothes up here north." Laura smiled at him. "I'll go down and burn those old clothes right now," Martin offered. "You better stay right where you are." Bert went to the windows. "If they've got ideas about your clothes, they might come back thinking they're going to catch us by surprise." Martin looked at Laura. "I don't want to be in Miss Laura's way. Couldn't I go back to the cellar?" Martin left the window. "Do you know what they did to the sacks of potatoes?" Martin shook his head, wordless. "One of those slave hunters took a knife out of his pocket and stabbed it into every bag." Laura felt sick. If Martin had been in one of those potato bags, she would never have forgiven herself for keeping him out of the secret room. "Do I have to stay in the hole?" Martin asked. "No," Bert replied, "but you do have to be able to get into it in a hurry. We better figure that out. What if you were all alone here and you heard the slave catchers at the front door?" "Why, I'd jump in that hole and I'd pull the lid on over my head." "And how would you get the rug back in place?" asked Bert. Martin thought this over. "I'd reach out of the hole and I'd pull that carpet over the top of me." Bert looked doubtful. "Let's see you do it." He and Laura watched while Martin lowered himself into the hidden room and pulled the rug over his head. Like a mole, he crawled under it until he had it in place, and then wormed back under the carpet into the opening and pulled the trap door shut. His muffled voice asked, "How was that?" The rug was wrinkled, but Laura thought Martin had done well under the circumstances. "Well, you'd better practice," advised Bert as Martin again came into sight. "Keep working at it until you can do it fast and get the rug smoother." He started for the door. "I'm going down and get rid of your clothes." At the door, he paused. "Let's see your shoes." Martin held up his feet, saying apologetically, "These shoes have done a lot of walking." Laura could see his feet through the large holes in the bottom of the shoes. "That's what I thought," Bert said. He trotted down the hall to his room and returned shortly, carrying socks and a pair of shoes. "See if you can wear these." Martin pulled them on. "Pretty good fit, but they look new. You shouldn't give them to me." "Oh, that's all right," said Bert. "My old shoes would be too small for you. I notice you have good-sized feet for the height of you. Once you get started growing, you'll be a tall fellow." Laura had recognized Bert's best shoes, but she said nothing. If her brother was willing to wear his everyday shoes to church, that was his affair. But her heart warmed toward him for his generosity. When Bert left for the kitchen, Laura went down with him. She watched while he stoked the fire in the stove and stuffed in Martin's ragged shirt and trousers. Since they were still damp, they burned slowly. Bert picked up the shoes he had placed on the floor beside the stove and looked despairingly at the smoky fire in the stove. "Guess I'll burn these in the fireplace." Soon the kitchen, heated by 2 fires, was uncomfortably warm. Laura was worried. "Bert, it's too late now, but suppose the slave catchers decide to come back for a closer look at those clothes?" "I'll just say we decided they were too worn out, not worth keeping after all, so we burned them," Bert said, poking a smoldering shoe. Laura opened the back door. The bright autumn day seemed to beckon her. The field behind the vegetable garden was aglow with goldenrod and wild asters. Beyond that, the trees in the wood lot were yellow and crimson. She longed to go outside, but she was afraid of meeting the slave catchers. They might waylay her and ask questions. She especially dreaded meeting with the one named Walt. There was something so ruthless about him. She knew he would stop at nothing to get what he wanted. And right now, he wanted Martin.